How about a big round of applause for John J. Reed? Come on up here, John.
I think this is all right. We spent like a half hour learning how to use this mic today. Oh, nope. All right. God, I hope that's right. Okay, we're walking down 7th Avenue, and Bauer is trying to convince me that he has found a foolproof way to make sure that this young man he knows, this kid who's trying to get his life together, will be able to take over his rent-stabilized lease when Bauer dies. This is our third date. Now, this may seem strange now, but this is, in the early 90s, Bauer and I are both HIV positive, had 2 years to live, so this kind of conversation was kind of par for course for us, really was, even on a second or third date. And Bauer and I knew each other for some time already at this point because we traveled in the same circles of gay, HIV positive, sober alcoholic New York City, which is a fairly specific demographic, so we really couldn't help but run into one another. But it was 3 years before he asked me out, and when he did, I got to tell you, I was so freaking flattered I could hardly stand it because Bauer was the guy everyone loved. Everyone loved him. In part because he was good looking, but really because he was just so kind and funny in a unique way. Like that day we were walking down 7th Avenue, this is Bauer talking to me. He's talking to me and he's telling me about that kid, right? And this other couple is walking up 7th Avenue. When they get right here, he goes, "You're amazing, there's nobody like you." And then comes back to me as if that didn't just happen, And, when I get my bearings about me, I say, "Bauer, what the hell was that?" And he looks at me and he says, "Nice Tourette's." And then from that point on, I would pick up my phone at home or at work, and it'd be, "You're a miracle," click, before I could answer, "Beautiful," click, it was just flat out sweet. And then we went on this retreat in Ivoryton, Connecticut for gay sober alcoholics, and we weren't there an hour when he said, "John, I really don't feel well, I need to lie down." And then within 2 hours of that, he was clasping his face in his hands, screaming, my eyes, crushed." So in the backseat of a borrowed car, I hold his head in my hands, trying to cushion it because every turn and every rough spot in the road is like a bat blow to his head, and he's screaming in pain. And I'm saying, "Bauer, it's all right. Listen, we're almost there. It's all right." Complete lie. Because we had driven directly into this Connecticut fog, got turned around, had no idea where we were or where the hospital was. But eventually we got there, they stabilized him, and determined that what he had was sinusitis. Now you have to remember this was a time when you could have lunch with somebody on Monday and they could have the sniffles, and on Sunday they'd be dead. So in our hearts, Bauer and I had this sinking feeling that this was AIDS coming in for the kill. Bauer's father was a retired physician, and he had him transported from that hospital in Connecticut to the family's house in Long Island, where he turned the family room into a hospital room, hired a nurse, and he himself took over Bauer's care. This was something Bauer had planned long in advance. When he thought time was coming, he wanted to die in his family's home. So one day the nurse asked me to leave because she had to do some procedure with Bauer. So I went in the dining room and sat with the father, having a cup of coffee. A man who I knew almost nothing about. Very taciturn, not forthcoming. I knew that he was roughly 75, as my father would have been if he were alive, that he was a World War II vet, like my dad, and that he had never quite come to terms with the fact that he had a gay son. And I'm there, the gay HIV-positive boyfriend, so this room was heavy. It was very heavy, and we were silent. And I'm looking at my mug of coffee because I just feel like to look at him would invade his space. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but I just felt that. And then out of my peripheral vision, I realized that this man is crying. He's crying very, very softly, and I am focused on my coffee at this point, And then very, very quietly and very softly, I don't even think he meant me to hear it, he said, "My son." And sat with that. And then the nurse came and got me and told me I could go back, thank God, And I went and sat next to his bed, and Jesus. And Bauer looked at me with this goofy expression, and he goes, "So, what'd you talk about?" And I said, I said, you ass, Bauer, we talked about you, of course, and it was so touching because your dad started crying and boom, Bauer's expression changed. He wasn't laughing anymore, and tears started coming, but this weird kind of Mona Lisa thing happened. I mean, because it was this like smile came up from underneath these tears. It was like I had found the most precious thing that ever existed, and I just kind of like set it in his lap. And all I had done was carry this message that for whatever reason, his father couldn't quite deliver to his son in this way his son was so desperate to receive it. The way every son is desperate to receive that. It was just, this was one of the greatest things I've ever done in my life. And the funny thing is I was completely ignorant of the fact I was doing it. I had no friggin' idea until I saw Bauer absorbing this information. And it was just beautiful. It was just so beautiful. And then 2 days later, Bauer called me at work, but his voice had changed. It was raspy, angry, and he was yelling at me. And I had never heard Bauer yell at anyone, no one. And he said, "You lied to me. We had a deal. You swore I wouldn't be forced to eat." Click. And I tried to get him back on the phone, but I couldn't. And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. We had no deal. But I had promised that if dementia were to set in, I wouldn't visit anymore. Nobody would, because he didn't want to be remembered that way. And we had seen so many friends fall into dementia. So the next time I saw Bauer was 10 days later at Redden's funeral home on West 14th Street. Now this is almost 20 years ago, and I can tell you in those 20 years, I have not met, another man quite like Bauer, I can also tell you that kid got the apartment, and he's still living there now. An apartment which rightfully should have been mine if you think about it. But anyway, I am really, in all honesty, just sad beyond words that he's not here. And it's selfish because I miss him. But then in a way, I also feel like you lose out because you didn't get the opportunity to know this really extraordinary human being. But because I did absorb a little bit of him during the time I was with him, I know exactly what message he would want me to say and end on right here. He would want me to say to you, "You're amazing, and there's nobody like you."